all started, it was all economic, right? And the big thing about a lot of this is that people think racism is about, somebody liking you or somebody wanting to be your friend. No, it's about power. It's about money, right? It all started with money, 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 money. So money is kind of the driving factor behind nearly everything that occurs, in America when it comes to race. If you cannot talk about the money, then you're not really talking about racism. You're talking about something else, but it's not structural racism. So here's what he says here. We're on page 121 in Black Labor, White Wealth, Dr. Claud Anderson's book. The copy, you can get a copy of the book at powernomics.com. I want to keep repeating that. This ethnocentric view was sustained by a broad sense of unity and community founded upon skin color, Judeo-Christian religions, and an espoused work ethic and a belief in the organized exercise of authority. Europeans' theft of other people's lands was justified by their Christian piety. So, because they were Christians, they used their Christianity to justify their treatment of Black people, right? They believed that God had given land to all mankind to be cultivated. So, their belief in their own racial superiority supplied the foundation and justification for their seeking to colonize and exploit the world. Now, first of all, let me ask everybody: can you all hear me? Like, give me a yes in the chat if you can hear me. Okay, I want to make sure I'm coming through all right. Give me a yes if you can hear me all right. Okay, because I'm tested. I'm checking my microphone and all that stuff. Gotta make sure. Okay, sometimes I end up talking to myself and I don't know it. So, one thing that's really interesting, what this makes me think about, is that a lot of times when white folks do things toward us that don't make any sense. Like, for example, let's talk about Travis Scott in this concert Astro World, where eight or nine people died. Well, most of those people were not Black. One of them, the little 9-year-old boy, was Black, but everybody else was white or close to white, right? They weren't Black like us. They were not African American. And so what was interesting, this is just one example. I could point out 1,000, but if you notice, when this happened, the media is like, "What's wrong with hip hop? Oh my God, this is terrible. Hip hop is killing our kids. This is horrible." But people like myself have been talking about how hip hop has been killing our kids I've been talking about this for 25 years, right? I've been talking about this for a very long time, right? And in fact, a lot of people don't even know. I mentioned this, and I'm gonna have to scream it from the rooftops. But before the Travis Scott incident even took place, 200 rappers had died this year, right? So effectively, you're allowing corporations to literally market death. They're marketing drug addiction. They're marketing death. They're marketing Black suffering. They're marketing racism. Dave Chappelle, shout out to Dave Chappelle. He pointed out, he said, I used the N word, 50,000 times on the Chappelle show. And not only did they never stop me, but they offered me $50 million to keep doing it. Right. And that's not something that they do for other cultures. And where does this come from? Where does this come from? Well, this comes from the fact that to some extent, in the eyes of America, you've been basically dehumanized. A good person can do a bad thing to another person as long as they don't see the other person as a person. As long as person A does not see person B as a fellow human being, then they can do horrible things to person B that they would never do to another human being. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so in many cases, part of what allows people to justify their behavior is there's some effort to dehumanize the enemy. That's why, for example, when you go to war, the Japanese weren't called the Japanese; they were called gooks, right, or chinks, or some other derogatory term, right? If you I remember there was a guy who what did he say? He went to Vietnam, and he landed in Vietnam in the middle of the jungle, and he was in a firefight, and he had to kill a guy from the Viet Cong. And he said, I felt terrible. He said, I couldn't believe I killed another human being. And he said, at that moment, I swore to myself that I would never kill another person as long as I was in Vietnam. He said, but I'm going to kill as many gooks as I possibly can. Right. So in a way, with Black people, part of the reason that the world is not sensitive to the things your community goes through is because you're not seen equivalent to other human beings. Right. And a lot of this started hundreds of years ago. And this is what allowed people to not feel like they're being hypocritical if you're this good Christian, but yet you've got 50 slaves. If somebody says, well, these people are ignorant, and you're actually helping them by enslaving them because they can't survive on their own. Well, then there are people that would say, okay, yeah, you're right. I'm actually helping these people by making them my slaves. And so anyway, let me keep going. We can talk more about that. because a lot of that happens with your so-called allies. You know, a lot of the Democratic Party allies feel that they're helping you by making you more like them. When really your goal, in my view, Black sovereignty means your goal is to be more like yourself. Whatever God meant for you to be, that's what you're supposed to be, not what they tell you you're supposed to be. So you're not helping me by telling me what to become. So here we go. It says, throughout the 1700s, European nations competed for the control of territory and resources in the New World and exercised varying degrees of harshness toward the local inhabitants. As European settlers established colonial governments to supervise the displacement of wealth from the oppressed countries to the mother countries in Europe, the welfare of the exploited was of secondary importance. The calculating cruelty of colonization in Sir William Blackstone's statement that, quote, the king can do no wrong, was a necessary and fundamental principle of the English Constitution. This political phrase clearly indicated the way Europeans felt about their role in exploiting slaves and Indians in the new land. So the king can do no wrong, colonization, England's driving this. England has decided that Black people are inferior. We can do whatever we want to them, and we don't have to feel guilty about it because the king can do no wrong. So you fast forward, 400, 500 years later, there's a Black lady named Meghan Markle who marries the son of the king, or whatever, or the son of the queen. I don't understand how that British royalty works. And everybody's excited because we feel like Meghan Markle had a come up, right? We feel like that's an upgrade. When really there were people who were a little more conscious who said there's nothing pride to be proud of, to be a part of the royal family that has built so much wealth from the mass exploitation and harm of Black people all around the world, right? They were the originators of much of the suffering that exists in America and around the world to this day. And they ain't giving that money back because the king can do no wrong and neither can the queen, right? That's the mindset. That's why she's got all the jewels and everything. And she is the largest landowner on earth. I think the Queen of England owns 6 billion acres of land. So how about we go and take all her land and just distribute that land, right? That would instantly be a nice reparations package, but no one's really conscious. Few people are conscious enough to understand, I guess, that dynamic. So anyway, let me keep going. The English also buttressed their religious justification for colonization with a legal system based on the concepts of individual and private property rights. In response to criticism of English colonization, an unknown Englishman wrote in 1622 that it is, quote, unlawful to take a land which none useth and make use of. Okay. This Englishman undoubtedly was referring to an old English legal concept, the right of discovery, which was in part based upon European legal doctrines, racial arrogance, and military superiority. It gave white European colonists the right to practice finders keepers with any land or resources that they discovered, end quote. With the cultural and legal backing of the right of discovery, European whites believed they had a license to steal. So I guess what he's saying is that it's like somebody coming in your house and they discover stuff that's in your house. Like I discovered food in your refrigerator, so that's my food. I discovered a couch over here that nobody wants. No human being has claimed this couch, so I'm just going to take it for myself. And that's kind of what happened. They came to America and discovered all this land that was already occupied, and you kind of know how the game works. So in his book, A People's History of the United States, Howard Zinn expanded on the way white settlers felt about their claims to the rights of discovery. Zinn wrote, the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, John Winthrop, created the excuse to take Indian land by declaring the area legally a vacuum. The Indians had not subdued the land and therefore had only a natural right to it, but not a civil right. A natural right did not have legal standing. You know what makes me think about actually is I was talking to a guy today, a brother named Chris Senegal, who's doing an amazing real estate project out of Houston. And I really like Chris a lot. He's a really smart guy. He works with a lot of other great real estate leaders in our community, like Julian Gordon, Jay Morrison, and some others. And Chris was talking about gentrification. And we started to really talking about how, we were sitting on this land in the hood. And you had white flight where white people left the hood. And then suddenly you had the inner cities kind of torn apart for a long time. But it was good property. It would be right next to the water or right in the middle of downtown. But white people were scared to live there and Black people were there, but we didn't own it. So then white people discovered that land, right? They rediscovered it and said, oh, wait, this place is right next to the water. I could build, condos here and rent them out for, $5,000 a month. So they came back and rediscovered land that we were already on and displaced us again. Right? Just similar to what they did with the Native Americans. Now, on one hand, obviously that's pretty treacherous shit. Like that's not cool, right? But at the same time, there is a point to be made to say that, when we were sitting on that land that nobody wanted, this so-called garbage land, we could have owned that, right? Now, pay attention now. What was going on during this time? That 30, 40 years when white people did not want to live in the hood. What were we doing with the hood? Well, you had people that were living in the hood that were, whatever little money they were making, they were spending on whatever they were spending on, but they weren't buying property. And then you had your educated black people, right, who were trying to get out of the hood. So you didn't just have white flight, you had black flight, right? That's you had white flight and black flight. So the same way that white people came back to the hood and started buying the property back, Chris Senegal made a great point where he said, why not bring black people back to the hood? Why don't we come back and buy that property? And that's exactly what a lot of experts are doing. That's what Chris is doing. That right down in Fifth Ward. That's what Julian Gordon's doing down in Baton Rouge. That's what Jay Morrison's doing down the south side of Atlanta, where the property is not expensive. That's what Kenny Gamble did in Philadelphia. He owns millions of dollars worth of property now because of that. So ultimately, this interesting thing about them sort of discovering places and thinking that nobody's there because the only people there are black or brown is kind of similar to them sort of thinking I can just kind of go and debo my way in and take whatever I want, right? Well, are you going to stand up to that? What do you do to fight back against that? There are ways to fight back. So he says Native American culture had not generally prepared Indians to protect themselves from the land expropriating practices of the white settlers. White society's legal concept of private ownership of property and resources was unfamiliar to Indians who, like African blacks, were communal. Shared rights and responsibilities for the land and its resources was the basis of their culture and survival. Conflicts between European and Indian culture were resolved at the expense of scores of Indians. When the first white settlers arrived in the 1500s, about 2 million Indians possessed the 2 billion acres that is now the continental United States. Today, about 800,000 Indians reside on some 200 reservations, a land mass of about 2% of the original amount of land that they possessed when the Pilgrims arrived in 1607. Moreover, the lands that were set aside as reservations for American Indians were some of the worst lands in the nation for sustaining agricultural products, livestock, and human life. Due to white society's oversight and later discoveries of precious metals and resources, these reservations occasionally did produce wealth. Whew. Okay, so I think that what it really speaks to is when you fast forward to 2021, you've got a lot of great people out here that, like Brother Ben X and some others, that are actually buying lots of property in different parts of the country. Maj Toure from Black Guns Matter, he owns some land, and a lot of people. Wall Street Trapper just bought 40 acres, and a lot of people are buying land, and I think that's a great thing. And one of the things that we did discuss at the All Black National Convention that had to be brought up is you got to protect what you have, right? Because we know the history. The history is that if you can't protect what you have, they're going to come and take it somehow, right? So protecting it might mean protecting it legally, being able to protect it financially, being able to protect it militarily, perhaps, right? That's where, maybe learn how to shoot that gun or whatever it is you got to do is important, right? So protecting what you have is extremely important. So let me keep going. Stolen land. We're on page 123 of Black Labor, White Wealth. Anybody who's listening, if you want to get a copy, you can go to powernomics.com. So feel free. I hope you'll go support Dr. Anderson and maybe buy some of his books for your relatives. I gave copies of Powernomics away at my wedding, as you guys might have seen, because I believe deeply that if you are about this, like if you're about this black thing and whatever it is that you believe, then carry that on your shoulder, carry that on your sleeve. Be an evangelist for the things that you love and the things you care about. And I believe this to the core. So when I was giving away stuff at the wedding, we didn't take any gifts. We didn't want anybody to give us anything. I was like, I want to give them something. And what represents me? Well, Powernomics does, right? So I hope you'll consider going to powernomics.com and, buying some stuff from Dr. Anderson's site to support him and his family and his institute. And then also supporting your family by saying, here, put a little bow on it, give it to all your relatives, give it to the kids down the street. And then if you really want to be ambitious, get your family together once a week and maybe read some of the book together. Make it like a family thing, like a fireside chat kind of thing, like what we're doing right now. You could get on a Zoom and do exactly what we're doing right now. I'm just doing it with a few hundred people, but you could do it with the people in your family. I'm just giving you some ideas, and I want to encourage you to be proactive about what you believe in. All right. So next, he says land ownership was second only to slave labor as a source of white wealth and power in America. Without the approval of the Indians, the London Company, an officially chartered immigration agency, sought to lure immigrants to America by substituting land grants of 100 acres to each colonial settler in lieu of the potential gold dividends. Other English chartering companies and colonial assemblies followed suit by offering land grants to newly arriving European immigrants. So basically, it sounds to me like they knew that there was gold in their hills, there was gold in the land, and so they were giving people land and saying, go work the land, just give us a piece of any gold that you find. The practice of awarding land to the head of each established household was effectively used to entice European immigrants to America. So they came here for free land. These land awards represented windfall wealth that ensured economic opportunity and provided them with a basic tool for earning a living. It also generated a sense of togetherness among European immigrants in a new land. The typical colonial family only needed 2 acres of land per capita to produce sufficient food to survive, says Stanley Lebergott in his book, The Americans, the Economic Road. Lebergott further stated that, quote, the greed of the European immigrants changed the use of Indian land from limited substance to widespread cash crop farming, from religious inspiration to land speculation for capital gains. So when the reason it's important to understand how all this land was given away is this. Let me ask y'all a question. Is the earth any smaller than it was, in 1705? Is the earth bigger, smaller, or the same size? Is there more land, less land, or the same amount of land? So it's same. It's the same, right? Type same in the chat. So the same amount of land that they were giving away 400 or 500 years ago, well, you can go find that land right now. That land is still out there, right? And so when you're talking about something like reparations or whatever the case may be, why don't we go back and look at some of these 100-acre land grants, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, do you know how much 100 acres is? That's massive, right? And why not break that off, break some of those pieces off to give that to Black people? We worked the land, we built the country, we built the wealth. So if you're talking about a reparations deal, it starts with redistributing the land. Why do you own all the damn land? We should have some of that land too. So let me keep going. The land grants to assist colonial settlers served as one of the earliest forms of affirmative action in America. The grants gave immigrants a basic level of wealth which they could leverage to purchase additional acreage, household farming equipment, or bring Black labor onto the land. This whites-only affirmative action program allowed 3/4 of America's colonial families to own their own farms. So this affirmative action program meant that they were given the highway to wealth. The highway to wealth is accumulation, asset accumulation, which therefore allows you to leverage that into other opportunities. So if I own a house and that's my asset, I can borrow against that asset to go start a business. I can borrow against that asset to go buy some stock, right? I can borrow against that asset to go buy some more land. Do you understand? So a lot of times that financial slingshot, if you will, of having some sort of financial asset. That's why I tell you guys, don't throw your kids out here without a slingshot. Get them those shares of stock. Maybe leave them some land if you can. Give them something, right? That slingshot is everything. That's how the rich get richer and the poor get poor. And so a lot of people stay poor and they struggle. Even college graduates in many cases struggle because nobody ever gave them a financial slingshot. They didn't have anything that they could lean on that gave them financial security or access to significant economic opportunity. One lady was on my Instagram. She made a comment where she said that she spent 4 years at a HBCU learning land cultivation and all these other things. And she said that because my student loans are so high, I can't even afford to buy any land anyway. So I have all this skill. I don't have anything I can do with it. All right. So let me keep going. The land grants to assist colonial settlers served as the earliest forms of affirmative action. Land grants alone were not the only government-backed benefit to white settlers. After all, a new nation of aristocrats with a privileged class could not be built on the basis of land ownership. Without an available pool of labor, land had little value. So this is where the Black people come in, right? You need, you have land. Well, somebody's got to work that land. Somebody's got to clear the land. Somebody's got to, if you're building property on the land, you're going to use it to farm on the land. You need people that are going to work that asset. Well, that's where you came in. You work the asset. Your labor formed the foundation of America's massive, massive wealth. So without an available pool of labor, the land had little value. It had to be cleared and brought to production. To achieve a maximum return from the land, the white settlers needed two things: cash crops and goods for European and local markets, as well as a well-disciplined, available, non-compensated, and permanent labor supply. Let me repeat that. A well-disciplined, available, non-compensated, permanent labor supply. The free white labor force would not satisfy these criteria because it was scarce and expensive. White people weren't going to do this work. Few European immigrants were willing to till the soil for another free or cheap land, for another when free or cheap land was available to any white who wanted to homestead. So they were basically saying, look, if they're giving away land and I can go have my own farm, why am I going to work on your farm? Right? So that was the problem. So they said if European serfdom had taught the pilgrims anything, it had taught them that it was essential to own one's own land and strictly avoid being bound to another's land. Shortly before the Revolutionary War, wealth had accumulated in the colonies, and the settlers were some of the richest people in the world. Less than 2% of the American immigrant population has zero or negative net worth. Wow, less than 2%. Okay. England's tariffs and economic acts that sought to redistribute the colonies' wealth to the mother country triggered a backlash of independence. After the war, the new congressional government established its own devices for transferring wealth to preferential groups. Westward Expansion added new wealth building opportunities through land and slave ownership. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 opened this new territory for homesteading. The government sold the land at public auction for $1 per acre. To ensure that the land would not end up in the wrong hands, Congress in 1790 passed the first national naturalization law, which specified that America would open its doors to white immigrants only. This is that systematic racism thing that we talk about, right? Let me keep going. Let me get back here. Local governments enacted anti-mobility and anti-contracting laws that forbade blacks to either own or even set foot onto land in the new territory. Thus, government land policies had a double benefit for whites. It gave them an opportunity to gain land, and it laid the foundation for a permanent wealth gap between them and the blacks. That right there, what I just read to you in that paragraph or two, explains at least about $2 or $3 trillion that they owe your black ass. They owe your black butt at least $2 or $3 trillion just for that paragraph alone. Just for the fact that pay attention now. When you really talk about systematic racism, and if you ever hear anybody talk about racism and they start talking about stupid stuff like a white lady cut in line in front of me at the grocery store, or some toothless hillbilly called me the N-word, please correct them. Please forgive them, for they know not what they do. Because that ain't racism. Racism is when you have systematic laws and applications of processes, a code of behavior that separates black people from white people. So here what they're saying is that in these laws, they set laws that basically put black people in the trap. You know, we love to rap about the trap. We like to brag about the trap, right? Rappers like to talk about the trap. Well, this is where the trap comes from. They put them in the trap where they said, okay, we got a problem. When we give land to white people, they don't want to work for other white people. They don't want to work. Nobody, they know freedom, so they don't want to be slaves. So we've got to create a situation where black people have to come work for us. So they said, number one, we're going to make sure that they never have any land. And then number two, we're going to make sure that they stay where they belong. We're going to keep them where they are so they can't go into certain territories. They can't go expand and find other opportunities. So we talk about inalienable rights. I talked to my daughter about this: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They gave black people life. Black people were not given liberty, and they were not given the ability to pursue happiness because they literally set laws that forbade them from going into certain territories to look for opportunities. So they created, as Bernard says, a red line, which basically says that, like, look, we're gonna create the trap, and we're gonna keep you in the trap. And when you're in the trap, you're gonna come work for us. We will be your Lord and Savior. We are your only opportunity to provide for yourself, right? And it was even worse than that, right? Because we were forced into slavery, right? It wasn't like they offered us a job. So here we go. So it says slaves forced France to sell the Louisiana Territory, and he puts the word "sell" in quotations. This is page 125 in Black Labor, White Wealth by Dr. Claud Anderson. You can get a copy at powernomics.com. I want to make sure I mention that to everybody listening. In 1802, just as America was on the verge of being squeezed out of the international cotton market, black slave insurrections in the Caribbean islands gave America a land windfall. Slaves successfully revolted against their French oppressors. A self-taught Haitian named Toussaint Louverture led a slave revolt with the help of yellow fever, defeated a 20,000 strong French army. Without a doubt, the Haitian revolt took advantage of the only time during the colonization of the New World that white slaveholders dropped their guard enough to allow slaves to break free and take control. Napoleon sent a French military expeditionary force to recapture Haiti, but the French troops were beaten, thereby forcing France to sign a peace treaty granting the slaves their freedom and Haiti its independence. The broader international white community operated from a policy that, quote, a threat to black slavery anywhere is a threat to black slavery everywhere. But neither the United States nor any other country bothered to assist France. France's defeat at the hands of the slave army destroyed Napoleon's dream of building a French settlement at the mouth of the Mississippi River at the current site of the city of New Orleans and set the stage for the United States to purchase the Louisiana Territory for a mere $15 million, less than 5 cents per acre. The purchase of the Louisiana Territory, which extended from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean, doubled the size of the United States. Ironically, the Haitian Revolution provided additional land for raising cotton, which justified the expansion of black slavery. Shortly thereafter, old planters and new immigrants joined the land rush to acquire huge tracts of the new free land. They echoed the national slogan for pursuing wealth, quote, open more land and buy more Negroes. So that's your formula for wealth. That's like a Tony Robbins seminar or something, right? The formula for wealth: own more land, buy more Negroes. That's literally what the formula was. So if the slogan for building wealth in America, making America the richest country in the world was buy more land, own more Negroes, and you are the descendants of the Negroes who were owned, somebody please explain to me why in the world somebody wouldn't clearly understand why you deserve reparations from anybody that considers themselves to be your allies. Seriously, it's very, very clear. All right. Buy more land, own more Negroes. Wow. All right. So let's keep going. European whites were given ownership to the land, and black slaves were given the obligation of picking the cotton for the next 150 years. So it looks like the Haitian Revolution opened up the opportunity to purchase the Louisiana Territory for a very cheap price, which unfortunately expanded slavery because there was a lot of cotton to be picked, and they weren't going to pick it, so they had you pick it, or they had your people pick it. So next chapter, Spain follows France's lead and quote unquote sells Florida. During the early 1800s, Florida was the only part of southeastern North America that did not belong to the United States. Though the U.S. government had made numerous offers, Spain refused to sell Florida. As Spanish territory and not a part of the United States, Florida was a natural attraction for displaced Indians and runaway slaves. So a lot of slaves ran away to Florida because Florida wasn't a part of the United States. Escaped slaves took refuge in Florida, established geopolitical relations with the Indians. Slaves and their mulatto offspring were often given high village positions as chiefs, interpreters, military advisors, and scouts, all of which aroused Southern white slaveholders who saw this as a lure to slaves seeking freedom. White planters and slaveholders encouraged General Andrew Jackson, who was noted for grabbing Indian land for his friends and personal ownership, to use his military forces to remove from Florida the Indians and escaped slaves. General Jackson complied, publicly arguing that Florida was a sanctuary for escaped slaves and marauding Indians who presented a menace to white society. Florida, according to Jackson, was essential to the defense of the United States. In 1814, having established his public premise for taking military troops into the Spanish territory, Jackson intentionally triggered the first of 3 Seminole Wars. Jackson also burned Indian villages, seized Spanish forts, and blew up Fort Negro on the Chattahoochee River in North Florida, killing more than 200 women and children. His military incursions into Florida created a political problem for Spain, which in 1819 agreed to give Florida to the United States in 1821. In appreciation, a grateful U.S. government appointed Jackson Florida's first governor. Jackson assumed the governorship, then reverted back to his earlier practice of making money for himself and his friends by expropriating Indian land and black labor. He advised his friends to purchase Florida land and black slaves before the prices rose. An Indian treaty was signed in 1819, and most of the Indians and free blacks were forced out of Florida. Jackson kept his promise to make free or cheap land available in Florida for cotton and sugar production. But some defiant Indians and black slaves dismissed the treaty and continued to fight for their land ownership right for another 20 years. The Third Seminole War ended in the 1840s when Osceola, the Seminole chief, died in captivity, and John Horse, the highest-ranking black Indian leader, after nearly 50 years of battles, ceased fighting without ever having been defeated or captured. When finally concluded, the Seminole Wars had cost the U.S. government 1,500 soldiers and $20 million in military expenditures. In 1970, the U.S. Indian Claims Commission awarded more than $12 million in land reparations to the remainder of the Florida Seminole tribe. The government also offered an apology. Notably, however, the contributions made by Black Floridian ancestors were left out of the history books, and their offspring were left out of the apology, as well as the reparations. Blacks have yet to receive any monetary reparations or historical recognition for their role in bringing Florida into the Union. So there's your real Black history. They did not teach that to you in school because they don't want you to know these things. So that's why, we got to educate our own people. All right, let me keep going. That paragraph just made me sad, so I don't have anything to say about it. It just makes me sad. Blacks, cotton, and the annexation of the Southwest. The United States went to war with Mexico in 1846, largely to satisfy slaveholders' interest in acquiring the fertile Texas plains for raising cotton. Mexican authorities offered a limited amount of free land to groups of white land squatters, but were not willing to sell land to cotton planters. By the 1830s, more than 20,000 whites had moved into the Texas territory with more than 2,000 black slaves. Mexican authorities outlawed slavery, but white slaveholders evaded the law by, quote unquote, freeing their slaves, then forcing them to sign lifetime contracts as indentured servants. So they freed them, but they kept them locked up on a technicality. Does that sound familiar to you? Does that sound like any institution that exists in America today, where you're technically free, but you're really not because you have no freedom to do what you want to do, right? So I think about it. What does it sound like to you? I don't know. The prison system, right? The prison system, it's not a coincidence that the states that have the most black slaves also have the most black prison inmates. If you go down south to Alabama, Louisiana, and Texas, that's where you find the most black slaves. Well, those also are the places where you have, that's where you find the most black inmates, which is also the place where you have the most black slaves. So slavery is not over. I mean, I hope you understand. Slavery is not over, y'all. It's just under another banner, right? And then on top of that, you have capitalism itself, which can become a form of slavery. This is why I've told you guys about freeing your children. When you raise them to believe that the only way to survive is to go get a job working for a white man, then you're signing your child up for slavery, especially when they have no assets. The assets free them. The assets liberate them and give them options. Pay attention now. Remember, back 500 years ago, 400 years ago, the reason white people could not get European settlers to come work for them was because they all got free land. So they said, in order to get them to work for us, we got to put them in the trap. So we take away their options, just like an abusive spouse. Abusers do this, right? They take away all your options. So you got to keep coming back to them, right? So they said, we're going to make sure the blacks can't get the free land and that they have limited mobility. So they have to come and work for us. Well, the same thing is true when you talk about the capitalist system. When you don't have any assets of your own, when your children have no assets, then they have no ability to walk away from the job. So the boss says, well, you can do whatever you want to do, but they still have to keep turning to white society in order to feed themselves because they don't have any other options. So freedom and options are very connected. So make sure that you give your children financial security so they have freedom and options and they can do what they want to do. All right, so let me keep going. What page are we on? We're on page 126. Or actually 127. 127 of Black Labor, White Wealth. You can get a copy at powernomics.com. All right, so let's see here. Blacks, cotton, and the annexation of the Southwest. Let's see here. The United States went to war with Mexico. Okay, Mexican authorities outlawed slavery, but white slaveholders evaded the law by freeing the slaves and forcing them to sign lifetime contracts. We mentioned that. The Mexican government responded by seeking to block any further white immigration into the territory. The 20,000 whites already in the territory responded by declaring squatters' rights on Mexican land, then publicly declared such lands to be free and independent from Mexico. Wow, white people, they're pretty determined here. Large Mexican armies attacked the American planters at the Alamo to recover Mexico's land. After the fall of the Alamo in the 1840s, the President of the United States declared war against Mexico to justify annexing the territory for slaveholders. Stanley Lebergott The writer quoted President Tyler, who said, "The war with Mexico gave the United States a monopoly of the cotton plant and thus secured to us a power of boundless extent in the affairs of the world. The monopoly was the great and important concern. It places all other nations at our feet. An embargo on cotton exportation during a single year produced in Europe a greater amount of suffering than a 50-year war." So it was all about that cotton. And who was picking the cotton? Y'all answer me in the chat. So America's economic dominance and political dominance was driven by its massive control of cotton. Who was picking the cotton? Answer me in the chat so we can know that we all paying attention here. And that this is why you deserve your reparations. Let's keep going. The U.S. won the brief war, and Texas entered the Union as a slave state. Abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison called the war an invasion, waged solely for the desperate, despicable, and horrible purpose of extending and perpetuating American slavery. On January 21st, 1848, Frederick Douglass, a former slave, wrote about the war in his Rochester newspaper, the North Star. He said, quote, "Mexico seems a doomed victim to Anglo-Saxon love of dominion of land." And what I'm really kind of gathering from this is if you look at this and try to look at this as objectively as you can without necessarily just our natural emotionality, which we're all going to be emotional about this, and I think we should be to a point, but I want you to kind of also pay attention to the writing on the wall and what's going on here. If you notice, the white man in general, not every white man, but the white men in power, they tend to be very aggressive, right? Andrew Jackson didn't like what they were doing in Florida. He felt like Florida was a safe haven for runaway slaves. So he said, let's, load up the cavalry. Let's take our guns and let's go down there and take what's ours. Right. Texas, the settlers in Texas, the white settlers in Texas didn't like what the Mexican government wanted them to do. The Mexican government banned slavery. So they said, we're going to squat on this land, take it from us, make us move. Right. And then when they made them move, they went to the Alamo and they conquered the Alamo and they killed a bunch of white people. Well, the president of the United States said, okay, all right, well, you want to do that? Well, then we're going to ride on you tomorrow. We will be declaring war against Mexico and we're going to take your land. So I'm not here to justify any of that, right? I'm not here to say that that's good or that makes them good people. But I think that whether you're a good person or a bad person, I think you have to understand that you're dealing with bad people, right? So even if you are good people, you must understand how you must deal with bad people. You're dealing with people or a culture in the United States where those in power just tend to come and take what they want, right? And so you can complain about it, you can scream and holler and be sad about it, but then some would say that maybe you should just find a way to fight back, whatever that looks like, right? Hopefully it doesn't lead to bloodshed, but at the very least, fighting back in other ways is extremely important because they ain't gonna give you nothing. I think that's really what's interesting is how many Black people really think that they're going to give us something. I don't see any indication in history to show that they like to give away shit. They don't give away anything, right? You got to take it, and they're not going to respect you unless you can come in there and take it, right? So I think the question is, are your kids prepared to defend it? Are they prepared to take what's theirs in an ethical way, right? I'm not advocating this sort of approach to everything, but I think just more lighthearted or less violent ways of thinking about what it means to take it. What does it mean to go and take something? Well, taking what's yours might mean when you show up to class, you're the best prepared student in the room, right? You're not there sort of whining and complaining about how hard it is or how racism kept you from being able to get the same books. You're just prepared, right? Taking it might mean that you stay ready. And I would argue that part of the reason they work so hard to keep Black men off balance by doing things like promoting drug addiction through music is because a drug addict ain't never going to be ready for nothing, right? An alcoholic ain't ready for nothing, right? So when you see these guys that are tricked into becoming, behaving as essentially worthless human beings because they're so doped up and out of their mind that they don't know what's going on, doped up, ignorant. Think about this. A man who's ignorant on drugs, on alcohol, who's financially irresponsible, who hasn't spent any time building or preparing, is basically defenseless. He's just like a little child. And so if I'm a conqueror and my goal is to conquer and to control another group of people, then I want to keep you as childlike as possible. So that's why in American media, there is a mass promotion of Black men who are either posing as little girls, like if the gayer you are, the more feminine you are, the more they love you, they're little boys. They're very immature, childlike. That's why you got these 35-year-old teenagers that are heavily promoted through hip hop music. Hip hop has been used as a weapon of mass destruction against Black people. We know this, right? Or or maybe they're like just funny, like comedians and stuff, right? Those are the people that promote. They don't really promote the serious Black men who are talking serious stuff, like the Malcolm X types or somebody like a Dr. Claud Anderson. They do not want to hear from people like that, because those are the people who are prepared to go to battle with you, right? So ultimately, when I'm reading this, what I'm reading is just kind of this history of war, this history of people just aggressively saying, if you can't take and defend what's yours, I'm just going to come over and take it. And if you're not prepared to fight back, then that's your problem. That's your issue, right? So the question is, are you defending yourself? Are you defending yourself intellectually? Are you defending yourself, by being prepared economically? Are you defending your communities, or are you letting anybody just come in there and set up shop in your community and take all the money and then leave? And I think it requires a little bit of a zero tolerance policy as well, to kind of say, we don't care. I don't care if you get mad at me. I don't care what you think about what I said. Like get the hell up out of here. Like, no, you're not going to come up in here and take all the money unless you're giving something back. So anyway, let me keep going. All right, so this is the Homestead Act. So on page 129 of Black Labor, White Wealth by Dr. Claud Anderson. And I'll read this section, and then I think that'll be enough for this week, because we read some pretty interesting, heavy stuff this week. The Homestead Act of 1862 represented America's last great land policy. It was enacted on the eve of the Civil War and provided that anyone living on land for 5 years while making some improvements could acquire a free title to 160 acres of land. This act remained in effect until 1900 and provided 400,000 to 600,000 white families with homes and farms. Of all the public land that this act passed into private hands, not more than 11 to 17% was settled by homesteaders. By 1900, most of the land had gone to speculators, who thus acquired the claims to rich Western lands, timber, and mineral rights without having to bid or compete for the wealth. So this is where a big part of where the wealth gap came from. When you look around and white people own everything, it starts with stuff like this, right? 600,000 families. These families have descendants. That land is still out there. They own that land, right? That's why, think about this. There's no person anywhere that owns a few hundred acres of land who isn't doing very well. Like, that land is very valuable, right? So it said Blacks were unable to acquire any of this last time giveaway of land wealth. Many were interested, but had their lives threatened by whites and decided not to pursue the free land. The acquisition policy of the Homestead Act was that anyone who had, quote, tended the land should not have to pay for it, end quote. But again, hypocrisy reigned. No one had spent more time tending the land than Blacks, certainly not European immigrants. Yet, even free Blacks were not allowed to participate in the famous land rush in the West. So they were giving away all this land. Black people were not allowed to participate. And you're going to try to tell me that you don't understand why we deserve trillions of dollars in reparations. Both free and enslaved Blacks were forced to delay their land ownership dreams and await the freedom that the Civil War would bring. Blacks were legally freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, but the end of their servitude did not result in receiving the compensation that was given to white indentured servants. At the end of their servitude, white indentured servants typically received a small parcel of land as well as a suit of clothing, farming tools, crop seeds, livestock, some money, and sometimes guns. These were the minimum tools needed to earn a living and protect one's family. Emancipation set Blacks free as ignorant, penniless, defenseless, landless, powerless, and non-competitive human beings. Nearly 5 million Blacks were made wards of the public, dependent upon handouts, welfare, or whatever they could steal in order to survive. No attempts were made to correct the centuries of social engineering to which Blacks had been exposed. They had no homes or friends in either the North or the South. When they asked for a little help or a hand up, President Andrew Johnson in 1866, with Southern states' encouragement, slapped them in their sullen Black faces by vetoing a congressional bill that would have given Black slaves a mere 40 acres and a mule for compensation for 250 years of bondage. I think that's enough for today. So now I'm going to go take a run with my wife and do a little cussing, because I don't know about y'all, but I'm kind of pissed off right now. I'm really angry. And when you think about that, right? You work, for 250 years for free, and it's not acknowledged, and they claim they're doing you a favor by giving you basic freedom, and you're freed with nothing. You have no assets, no nothing. Just like, how do you survive? You have no money, no food, no nothing, right? A lot of slaves, that's why a lot of slaves voluntarily went back to slavery, because they had nothing. They had absolutely nothing. And then on top of that, you're carrying, the only thing you do have is you have baggage that comes from the fact that you were engineered to be a slave. You were trained from birth to be a slave. That your culture completely ripped away from you. Like, you were broken down into nothing. So, and that slave culture is what you still see to this day. That's why you see so many examples where our people don't fight back. They go along to get along. They're trying their best just to, they'll vote for anything. Just they're begging white people to like them. You got people out here that don't want to read a book, don't want to work hard for anything, don't want to accomplish nothing, right? So you know what I'm talking about. You see that slave culture all around you. And so ultimately, I think that what we're burdened with is the challenge of really rebuilding the black man and the black woman from the inside out. And that's why I give so much respect to the Nation of Islam and other organizations like that, because they've actually found a way to build a better black man. And they understand fully that when you're building a better black man, you've got to build in a very deep way. It can't just be about putting a little money in his pocket. It can't just be about sending him to a white university so he can learn a couple things. It has to be a spiritual process. It has to be something that involves reprogramming the subconscious and conscious minds of black people to allow us to really see ourselves as what we're supposed to be and to do what we're supposed to do, right? So ultimately, this is what you're dealing with. You were dropped out. Your people were just sort of sent out into nothingness, into a world full of hate. And shout out to the ancestors who were able to survive all of this, right? And I think that this was what this said to me was it just was such a clear reminder of how this country was built and what they did to us. And obviously, it makes it very clear that the reparations debate, there is no debate about reparations. I'm not voting for anybody that doesn't understand that, right? And so I think moving forward, I think at the very least, it reminds us of the importance of the fact that we must shape our own culture in every level. We must own our own media. We must control our own schools. We must manage our own children. We must rebuild our families. We must learn how to love each other and love ourselves. Like, we have to do all these things. And I don't want no help from nobody else. I just don't. I don't trust you. I don't want you interfering in any of this. This is a black owned responsibility. We own this. This is ours. I believe we can solve this on our own, but we got to keep the outsiders from interfering with this until we repair ourselves. And then at that point, we can re-engage with the world, but we must re-engage in a very healthy and in a strong, stable way. Okay. You cannot integrate from a position of weakness. That's why integration failed, because you have a bunch of empty shell of a human being, broken down, busted down slaves, torn up self-esteem, tons of self-hatred, trying to integrate into a system where basically you're just going to get pimped, right? It's like a woman getting married when she has no self-esteem. Well, she's going to end up marrying a pimp who's going to beat her ass and take her money and mistreat her because she doesn't know any better, right? So that self-love piece is extremely important, and that's what we must focus on as a community. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go and find my wife and go for a run, so I can kind of process some of what we went through tonight. Next Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, we will meet again for the book club. If you want to get recordings of all the lectures we've done to this point and you just signed up or you just came in, the book club meetings are live. If you come live, they're free. If you can't make it or you want the recordings of everything, go to drboycebookclub.com. That's drboycebookclub.com, and it's all right there. Again, also, to get a copy of Powernomics, you can go to powernomics.com. And I hope you'll go and support Dr. Anderson and buy some books for your relatives and stuff like that. Let's go make it rain on the Powernomics Corporation, and then make it rain on your family. You rain in knowledge on them, because we've got a job to do, and we need all hands on deck for this job. Last but not least, this weekend, the Black Business School is having a free event with Al Duncan. Al Duncan's a good brother, very smart man, who's a very well-known public speaker. And basically, it's something called Black Experts Empire, and it's something that is for anybody that wants to. If you want to go and become a content creator, if you want to become a social media influencer, if you want to become a public speaker, if you want to become a consultant or a coach or anything like that, then this is the place to go. I'm going to be there. And I talk about content creation because I make a lot of content, and Al talks a lot about public speaking, and they have experts that cover all the gamut of all these issues. So if you're interested, you can go to blackexpertsunchained.com. That's Black Experts Unchained. Somebody type blackexpertsunchained.com in the chat, and that's where you can find it. And if you want to find the recordings of all these lectures, you can go to drboycebookclub.com, drboycebookclub.com. All right, guys, I'm out of here. It was great to see you. Love you very much, and I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful night. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.